The man who made me question my sexuality was my ex's brother. It was a regular Tuesday, or at least it should have been. Instead of focusing on my work or scrolling through memes on my phone like any normal person, I was sitting on the porch, openly staring at a man I had only known for 3 weeks. Ben, Maya's older brother, the family's best-kept secret. 3 weeks ago, I didn't even know he existed. Sure, Maya had just broken up with me, but we were still on good terms. She'd made it clear it was just a break. "Alex," she'd said, "I just need to figure out your feelings. I feel like I love you more than you love me, and that's not fair to either of us. But we'll still be friends, okay? I'll wait." I had no idea what that meant, but I didn't argue. Maya had a way of being Maya. And me? I'd been living as a paying guest in the outhouse of her family home for 3 years. Her family was practically my second family. I'd come and go casually, help set up for birthday parties, and eat dinner with them when I didn't feel like cooking. And in all that, I never had a peep about Ben. Not a single mention of a mysterious older brother. Until he showed up out of nowhere. And now, there he was, washing this 2003 Porsche Cayenne in the driveway like he was auditioning for a role in some sultry car wash drama. His muscles flexed as he worked, his shirt clinging to him thanks to a generous splash of water. He was drenched, and from the cocky little smirk playing on his lips, he knew I was watching. "Enjoying the view?" His voice cut through the hum of the hose. I jumped, banging my head against the light post. "Smooth, very smooth, Alex." Wasn't," I stammered, even though the redness creeping up my neck said otherwise. "I was just thinking." Ben leaned against his car, arms crossed. "About what? The meaning of life, or my excellent car washing skills?" He had this way of making everything sound like a challenge, daring me to react. I hated it. Or maybe I didn't. Honestly, I wasn't sure anymore. Flashback, 3 weeks ago. The first time I met Ben was the day Maya broke up with me. I was sulking over tea in the kitchen when he walked in like he owned the place, towel around his neck, sweat dripping from his workout body. "Who are you?" he'd asked, voice calm but curious. I blinked at him. I'm Alex." "Alex," he repeated, as if testing the name. "And you are—" "Maya's friend," I said quickly. For some reason, saying ex-boyfriend felt weird. Ben smirked, leaning against the counter and shaking his protein shake bottle. "Friend, right. Nice to meet you, Alex." He offered his hand, and when I shook it, his grip was firm, his eyes sharp. It was like he was sizing me up, trying to figure out exactly what I was doing there. Until Maya walked in, a bit startled by her look. Alex? Ben? Hello, sis," Ben greeted, his lips pulled into a wide-looped smile, which definitely made Maya shift on her foot. I was confused, surprised, and awkward. Confused because he called Maya sister. Surprised because I never knew Maya had a sibling. And awkward, well, let's give the credit to this human who stood there enjoying making both of us uncomfortable. From that moment, I knew he was walking trouble. A few days later, I ran into Ben again, literally. I'd been walking into the main house to grab some food when I collided with him in the hallway. He looked rugged and devastatingly handsome, with a deep voice enough for any girl to drop for their knees. "Whoa there," he said, steadying me with a hand on my shoulder. "In a hurry?" I froze. His hand lingered a second too long. "Sorry, I didn't see you," I mumbled, stepping back. "Clearly," he smirked, his eyes flicking over me in that infuriatingly confident way. "You should watch where you're going. Or maybe you just wanted to bump into me. I get it. Happens all the time." I stared at him, unsure if he was joking or just unbelievably cocky. "Don't flatter yourself," I said, finally finding my voice. He chuckled, the sound low and rich. "Sure, Alex. Whatever you say." After that, it was like he was everywhere. In the kitchen, in the garden, lounging on the porch. He had this way of appearing out of nowhere, always making some comment that left me flustered. The worst part was that he never crossed the line. His comments were always just subtle enough to leave me wondering, was he flirting? Was he just being Ben? Did he know how much he was messing with my straight head? Flashback ends. Present day. And now, here we are. 3 weeks of awkward encounters, subtle touches, and infuriating smirks had led to this moment. Ben turned off the hose, shaking water from his hands before grabbing a towel. "You've been quiet lately," he said, breaking the silence. "Something on your mind?" I hesitated. How could I explain what was on my mind when I didn't even understand it myself? "No," I finally said, "just stuff." Ben laughed softly, the sound warm and teasing. "You and your stuff. One day, Alex, you're going to have to be a little more specific." He walked past me, enough that I caught the faint scent of his cologne. My heart did that stupid fluttery thing again, a thing I never felt with Maya, and I cursed myself for feeling this for a guy? "Get a grip on yourself, Alex. You're freaking straight." As he appeared into the house, I leaned sideways to the light post, exhaling deeply. 3 weeks ago, I thought I had my life figured out. Decent job, a solid relationship with Maya, and a cozy little outhouse I've been renting on her family's property for 3 years. Everything is neat and tidy. Now, let's just say the neat and tidy ship had sailed the moment Ben Parker strolled back into his family's life, raging all his swagger and unresolved drama with them. And me, I was stuck in the middle of it, trying to piece together the dynamics of a family I thought I knew. Spoiler alert, I didn't. Now, thanks to Ben, everything felt different, confusing, and maybe, just maybe, a little exciting. It didn't take a genius to figure out that Ben wasn't exactly on good terms with his family. From the moment he stepped into the house, the tension was palpable. That evening, I was at the dinner table with the Parkers as usual. Mrs. Parker insisted I join them for meals. She'd always treated me like family, which is one of the reasons I'd stayed so long. Maya was telling a story about some client she dealt with at work, her voice overly cheerful, probably an attempt to drown out the tension in the room. Ben sat across from her, leaning back in his chair with a lazy smirk, twirling a fork in his hand like he couldn't care less about the world. "So Ben," Mr. Parker began, setting down his glass of water with a deliberate clink, "what are you planning to do now that you're back?" Ben didn't miss a beat. "I don't know, maybe start a band, travel the world, take up interpretive dance." He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maya groaned. "Can you at least try to answer seriously for once?" "What?" Ben asked innocently. "Dad loves a good joke." Mr. Parker's face tightened. "This isn't a joke, Ben. You can't keep waltzing in and out of this family whenever it suits you." The smirk disappeared from Ben's face, replaced by a harder expression. "Right, because I've been so welcome here." Mrs. Parker took like she wanted to intervene, but Ben wasn't finished. "You don't want me here, Dad. I was summoned here because your business needed me. I'm here because of Mom's desperate pleas. I'm here to save what your princess ruined after you handed over the business snatched out of my hand, a business she never wanted, so let's not pretend otherwise." Maya looked stunned and ready for a meltdown, and my heart was saddened by her vulnerable sight as I kept my hand over hers on the table, which was noticed by Ben's darkened gaze. I don't know what the fuss was about, but at that moment I didn't like Ben with the way he was behaving. "You left, Ben. Don't act like I didn't give you a chance to come clean," Mr. Parker shot back, his voice low and cold. "But you chose to turn your back on this family." Ben stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Choice, you say, huh? Or was it an ultimatum, choosing between my personality and living a fake identity?" He scoffs with a look of despair behind his rebellious stance. "You made it pretty clear I wasn't wanted. I just did you a favor by leaving." The air in the room was suffocating. Maya stared at her plate, her knuckles white under my hold as she gripped her fork. Mrs. Parker looked like she might cry. "Right," Ben said, grabbing his keys from the counter. "Thanks for dinner. Always a pleasure." He was gone before anyone could respond, his car roaring as he drove away. Later that night. I couldn't stop thinking about the argument as I sat in my room later that night. The way Ben's voice had cracked just slightly when he talked about not being wanted, the anger in his dad's eyes, the way the whole family had gone silent after he left. Around midnight, I heard it, the screech of tires pulling into the driveway. I frowned, moving to the window. Ben's car was parked haphazardly, and he was stumbling out of the driver's seat. Something about the way he moved set off alarm bells in my head. "Ben?" I called as I ran outside, my heart pounding. He didn't respond. leaning heavily against the car. His shirt was torn and a dark stain spread across his side. "Ben!" I reached him, slipping an arm around his waist to steady him. "I'm fine," he muttered, though his voice was slurred. "Yeah, sure, you look super fine," I said, trying to ignore the panic rising in his chest. "What happened?" "Don't ask," he mumbled, his head dropping forward. I didn't. Instead, I half dragged, half carried him into my outhouse, my mind racing. "Sit," I ordered, pushing him onto the couch. He groaned, leaning back as I grabbed my first aid kit. "Take off your shirt," I said, then immediately regretted how that sounded. And the wounded douche dares to smirk lazily. I mean, so I can see the wound. Ben chuckled in his raspy tone despite his condition. "You wanted me shirtless, Alex. All you had to do was ask." "Shut up," I snapped, my face heating as I helped him out of the torn fabric. The sight of the angry scrape across his ribs made my stomach churn. "What the hell happened?" I asked, dabbing at the wound with antiseptic. "Bar fight," he muttered. "Seriously?" He shrugged. "The guy was being a prick." "Look who's talking," I muttered under my breath. He chuckled, wincing slightly. "You're cute when you're mad." "Yeah, well, you're annoying when you're bleeding," I shot back, trying to ignore the flutter in my chest at his comment. By the time I finished patching him up, he looked more tired than hurt. "Thanks," he said softly, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by something vulnerable. "Don't mention it," I replied, standing awkwardly. "You should get some rest." He nodded, his eyes already closing as he leaned against the couch. That night marked a shift. The next morning, Ben was gone, leaving only a hastily scrawled note that said, "Thanks, Nurse Carter." But he started showing up more often after that. Sometimes it was to borrow a tool, other times just to hang out. And somehow, without me even realizing it, we started clicking. It wasn't anything big. Little things, like him bringing over takeout or us arguing over what to watch on TV. But it was enough to make Maya notice. A week later. "You've been spending a lot of time with Ben," she said one day, her tone casual but her eyes sharp as we worked on one of our pastime activities of painting in my room. "He's been around," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant, my hand moving the brush to give a finished look to the river. Maya frowned. "I thought you were figuring things out about us." "I am," I said honestly, "but that doesn't mean I can't talk to your brother." Maya didn't look convinced. The next thing I knew, she grabbed my collar and yanked me to her level. "You're mine. I hope you remember, Alex." My jaw ticked as Maya's gaze trained on my lips. "It's been a while since we kissed. Kiss me, Alex." I gulped, uneasiness setting in the pit of my stomach. Maya and I have kissed many times, but it never felt so uncomfortable as it felt in this moment. "Maya?" I mumbled, licking my lips wet at my uneasiness. "We're on a break." "And?" She countered my reasoning, her face almost a millimeter away. "A break cannot change the fact that we are endgame," she muttered over my lips, my fist balling firmly as I resisted from pulling away until she asked, "Or are you having second thoughts?" My eyes widened slightly, registering her words. "Are we endgame?" But why it didn't feel right to imagine. "Alex, I have this new video game." Ben's sudden intruding voice snapped me out while Maya was visibly pissed as she let me off by stepping back. Ben looked amused at the tension in the air, and if looks could kill, he'd already be 6 feet under by the way Maya glared at him. And I was in an awkward situation. I don't know why, but every time Ben comes, my heart is filled with this strange feeling that I'm unable to decipher. It never happened while being around Maya. "Is kissing normal between friends?" Ben asked, as he looked entertained by the way Maya scowled, while I felt face-palming myself. "What? Alex said he was your friend when we first met. Right, Alex?" I really wanted to punch that handsome punk when Maya gave me this unbelievable look as she chuckled dryly. "Uh-huh. Friends, Alex?" "Maya, I didn't get the chance to clear the mess as Maya marched out in anger, pushing past Ben, who thoroughly appeared entertained. "Whoa, did I mess up the things between the friends?" "Ben, shut up," I warned him, rubbing my face. I really felt bad for being put at this crossroads. Maya and I, we had a thing, okay? And we're on a break. But you're messing up with me in my head. I heard this deep chuckle, his footstep inching closer until I felt him towering over me. Yeah, he was an inch taller than me, this narcissist prick. "Alex, look at me." His voice was something that I never heard before. Deep, raspy, and something you could call sensual, which commands you to submit. And I did just that. Submit. I looked up at him, dazed and frowning as he tipped my chin to look into my eyes. "What are the chances of you pulling back if I kiss you now?" His presence was magnetic, and his voice was deep and commanding, yet there was a hint of challenge in his tone. It wasn't just a question, it was a dare. And I froze. The idea of being kissed by him, by Ben, was both thrilling and terrifying. My thoughts raced, colliding and crumbling under the weight of my confusion. Why wasn't I resisting? Why didn't I immediately push him away or laugh it off like some bad joke? Because part of me didn't want to. I hated the realization. My heart was hammering against my ribs as his fingers tipped my chin upward, forcing me to meet his gaze. His touch was warm, almost grounding, but it only added to the storm inside me. I was standing in the middle of a battlefield, caught between my mind screaming, "This isn't right," and the quiet thrill coursing through my veins whispering, "Why not?" My body betrayed me, leaning ever so slightly toward him, my breath shallow and my lips parted. I didn't consent, but I didn't resist either. Why did it excite me? I wasn't into men. I'd always been sure of that. I dated women, Maya, and it had been fine, normal, comfortable. But standing there, under the weight of Ben's gaze, I was questioning everything I thought I knew about myself. Ben leaned in, just a fraction closer, his eyes flickering down to my lips. My pulse quickened as I stood there, entirely at his mercy, trapped in a moment I didn't fully understand until his lips brushed against mine gingerly. And then panic surged through me like a cold wave. I'm not into men, I stammered, stepping back abruptly, the words tumbling out unconvincingly. Ben's jaw tightened, frustration flickering across his face before he replaced it with that infuriating smirk of his. His gaze, however, lingered on my lips, almost daring me to believe my own words. "Sure," he said simply, his tone dripping with sarcasm. And something else, something that felt like a disappointment. With that, he stepped back, running a hand through his hair before turning and walking out. The room felt emptier and colder the moment he left, but my head was anything but quiet. I stood there, my legs refusing to move, my hands trembling slightly as I stayed at the door. My thoughts were jumbled, a messy mix of denial, confusion, and frustration. What just happened? Why had I let him come that close? Why hadn't I stopped him sooner? Why did the idea of that kiss, the one that almost happened, still linger in my mind, leaving me breathless and shaken? I dragged a hand down my face, groaning audibly as I sank into the nearest chair. This wasn't me. This couldn't be me. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring blankly at the floor, but I knew one thing. It was time I drew a line between Ben and myself. 1 month later. It had been a month since that moment with Ben, and I was still questioning everything. I had drawn a line in my mind, kept my distance, tried to ignore the pull, the spark that seemed to crackle every time he was near. But of course, Ben wasn't exactly the type to respect personal space. I told myself it was just a phase. I was straight, right? But Ben wasn't the type to let things slide. Maya, meanwhile, was pushing for clarity about us. Though still on a break, she wasn't interested in hearing that. I could see the frustration building in her, and with Ben always lurking in the background, the air between us was thick with tension. The next evening. It was another evening at the Parker's house, and I was trying to keep my head down. Things had been awkward between me and Maya, made worse by Ben's constant hovering. Maya was unusually quiet, and I could tell she wasn't happy with the way things had been going. I was in the kitchen getting a snack when she slipped in, obviously hoping for some alone time. "Alex, could you pass me the salt?" she asked, her voice soft, with a hint of hope behind it. She was watching me too closely. I handed her the salt, but before I could pull away, leaning against the doorframe with his usual smug grin. "Need help in there?" he asked, glancing at Maya with a challenging game in his eyes. I rolled my eyes and started to back away, but Ben wasn't about to make this easy. Maya shot him a sharp look, clearly not in the mood for his teasing. "I've got it under control," she muttered. Ben ignored her. "I wasn't talking to you, sis. I was asking your pretty friend, Alex." His smirk widened. I gulped, shaking my head in denial, and muttered, "No." "You sure? Because if not help, maybe you need something else," Ben said, glancing at me, his eyes falling to my lips. My heart skipped a beat. His words hit harder than I was ready for. "Alex, let's go. I'm done with this," Maya snapped, storming out of the kitchen. Ben chuckled, his voice dripping with amusement. "Well, that's one way to handle things." I gave him a glare, my frustration bubbling over. "You know, you've got a talent for ruining things." "That's what my parents keep telling me," he joked. His tone grim, but he continued smirking. "But in my understanding, I don't ruin things. I just make them interesting." I was so over this. "You need to stop, Ben," I muttered, trying to shake off the tension. Ben took a step closer, his voice low. "Stop what? Trying to figure you out? Or stop trying to make you figure it out?" I couldn't get a word in before he walked out, leaving me standing there, my mind a mess. A few days later. Maya's mother's birthday was coming up, and she insisted I handle the party arrangement. It was clear that Maya wanted to keep me away from Ben, but Ben had a way of pushing my buttons, always too close, making it hard to focus. Maya wanted something definite between us, but I had no answers. I was stuck between them both. A day before the party. The party was tomorrow, and while I was going over the final details that afternoon, I passed Mr. Parker's office. As I was about to walk by, I overheard raised voices. I couldn't help but stop. "Ben," Mr. Parker said, his voice tight, "I need you to come back. The business is struggling, and Maya can't handle it alone. I need you." Ben's response was sharp and full of anger. "You want me back after everything you took from me? That's rich, Dad." There was a long pause before Mr. Parker sighed. "Let's not rehash the past. This is a crucial time, and as the eldest, you need to step in. For the business." Ben's voice was filled with resentment. "I don't forgive you for what you did, but don't force me to leave again." The conversation ended abruptly, but the weight of it lingered in my mind. Ben clearly had unresolved issues with his father, and now he has been asked to return despite everything that had happened. Later that night. With the party decoration finished, I finally had a moment of peace. Maya, however, had other plans. She invited me to chill on her bedroom balcony, a cup of coffee in hand, the night air calm, but my thoughts were far from peaceful. I couldn't stop thinking about Ben and his strange relationship with his family. "What's really going on with Ben?" I asked. "Why is he like this?" Maya's expression tightened. "Ben's always been like that. Let's not talk about him." Before I could press, she moved closer, settling into my lap. "Maya, what are you doing?" I stammered. She leaned in, her breath warm against my ear. "I think it's time we stop talking and start feeling," she murmured. Heat rose in my chest, but I gently pulled back. "Maya, we're still figuring things out." Her eyes flashed with frustration. "We have something, Alex." Without thinking, I said, "We need to talk about Ben." Her eyes darkened, her voice sharp. "I don't care about him. He left. I am stuck with everything, the house, the business, all of it." She stormed off, leaving me with the weight of her words and the storm of emotions in my chest. Next evening, the birthday party. The birthday party was winding down. Guests were still milling around, enjoying the last moments of the evening. The soft murmur of polite conversation filled the air, but there was a noticeable shift, the absence of Ben. Mrs. Parker had asked about him again, her voice carrying a weight of unspoken disappointment. Maya's response was sharp, clipped. "He didn't want to come, Mom. You know how he is." Her mother sighed, the sadness clear on her face. Mr. Parker grumbled, standing beside her, his displeasure obvious. "He's got no respect for the family." It made my chest tighten, but I learned to keep quiet. Maya shot me a look, the tension in her gaze telling me she was struggling to keep her composure, and that's when I saw my chance to escape. "Excuse me, I need to step out for a second," I muttered, giving Maya an apologetic smile. I slipped through the crowd, finding the hallway empty and quiet. My feet carried me, almost by instinct, until I found myself standing in the corridor that led to the balcony. And there he was, Ben. His broad back was hunched, his figure silhouetted against the soft glow of the evening sky. The sight of him, so distant and yet so familiar, struck me deeply. "Not a fan of the party?" I said, my voice low. Ben glanced over his shoulder, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Nope," he said with a shrug. "Not my thing." I stood there for a moment, watching him, unsure of how to bridge the distance that had grown between us. "Your mom's looking for you. She looked sad about your absence." "She'll get over it," Ben sighed, a deep exhale that spoke volumes. "And anyway, they never understood me. It was always about the family's reputation, always about what was best for them." His words hung heavily in the air, the bitterness clear. My throat tightened, something in his words resonating with me more than I expected. "I get it," I said softly. "I really do, Ben." Ben's gaze flicked to me, his eyes dark and intense. "You really understand?" he asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because if you did, you wouldn't be running from me." I sucked in a breath, my chest constricting. The air between us seemed changed now, thick, heavy. His words had pierced right through me, and I wasn't sure if I should pull back or lean in. My heart pounded in my chest, the confusion that had been gnawing at me for weeks now coming to a head. "I'm not running," I admitted, voice shaking. I'm afraid of what I feel. I never thought I could feel this way for a guy." The moment hung there, suspended in the air, as Ben took a slow step toward me. His gaze never left me, dark eyes searching me, reading me. His hand lifted, brushing lightly against my cheek in a gesture so gentle it almost felt unreal. "Even I never thought I could feel this intensely for someone who feels so right yet forbidden at the same time," Ben murmured, his voice barely a whisper and raspy. "But maybe it's time we stop running." His breath mingled with mine, the heat unbearable, as he asked the same question he asked months ago. "What are the chances of you pulling back? If I kiss you now?" Before I could answer, his lips were on mine, slow yet urgent, sending a jolt through me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't fight it. The kiss deepened, the world disappearing around us. But just as everything felt right, a gasp shattered the moment. "Maya." I pulled away, my heart pounding as her tearful eyes locked onto mine. "Alex?" she whispered, voice trembling. Everything froze. Maya stood there, hurt and confused, and in that instant, everything changed. Later that night. The party had ended, but the living room felt like a battlefield. The remnants of appetizers and champagne glasses scattered around only seemed to highlight the tension in the air. Maya stood to one side, her face flushed with angry tears, her fists clenched as if she could fight away the hurt. I couldn't bring myself to look at her, not when everything was unraveling so quickly. Ben stood on the other side, tall and cold, his arms crossed, eyes avoiding everyone. His posture seemed indifferent, but I could see it. The tension in his shoulders, the subtle clenching of his jaw. It was clear he was struggling, but he wasn't going to let anyone see. Not now. Maya's voice cut through the heavy silence, trembling with fury. "You kissed him?" She glared at me, eyes wild with betrayal. "After everything, after what we were... You did this?" "I didn't mean for it to happen, Maya," I muttered, but the words didn't seem to come out right. My voice was too weak, too unsure, and the guilt was too strong. "No," she snapped. "You didn't mean for it. Then why him? Why my brother?" "Maya, please," I began, but she wasn't listening, her eyes burning with anger. "I trusted you, Alex," she said, turning away from me and directing her fury towards Ben. "And you stole him away from me?" The word "stole" felt like a punch to the gut. I never wanted to hurt Maya, but Ben... I couldn't ignore how I felt anymore. I couldn't push it away. Ben, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke, his voice cold as ice. "Maya, Alex is your ex, not your boyfriend." Her face paled as the sting of those words sank in. Maya looked between Ben and me, her mouth opening, but no words coming out. Ben's simple statement had shattered her perspective, but I could see the hurt still lingering in her eyes. Mr. Parker's voice, low and furious, cut in. You're the reason this family's falling apart. I'm the only one who's finally being honest with myself, Ben interrupted, his voice unwavering. And maybe that's not what you want to hear, but it's the truth. I'm not sorry for being who I am. Who you are is a disgrace, Mr. Parker spat, his face twisting with disgust. A burden on this family. Ben's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. I've been trying for years to be the son you want me to be, Ben said, voice low and controlled. But it wasn't enough, and it never will be. Ben's gaze next shifted towards Maya softly, his voice quiet and apologetic. Maya, I never meant to hurt you, but my heart doesn't listen to reason. I tried to push it away, but it didn't work. I'm sorry, but you don't have to worry anymore. Tomorrow, everything will go back to how it should have been until I came back. Maya didn't say anything at first. She just stared at him, her expression a mix of disbelief and sorrow. The anger had evaporated, leaving a hollow space in its wake. She was too stunned to speak, her emotions too raw. Mrs. Parker was crying silently, seeing Ben leave to his room upstairs. She steps towards Maya, her voice shaky. Please don't take this out on him. He's been through so much already. You don't understand. Maya didn't react, her lips trembling. I wanted to go after Ben, but Mr. Parker's seething stance made me retreat my way to the outhouse. The next morning, Mrs. Parker summoned me to the house urgently. As I finally stepped inside, I saw Ben loading up the car with luggage. My heart sank. Was he leaving? Confused, I panicked. I walked toward the house only to meet the desperate and weary moist eyes of Mrs. Parker waiting for me. Alex, please, don't let him go. He's been through so much already. Now that he's found happiness, he's willing to give it up to keep the peace. Please, stop him. I felt the air leave my chest. Ben was leaving? After everything? I bolted outside, but Ben was already in the car driving away. I could let him go, but he was gone. I felt my heart shatter as I crouched down on my knees feeling lost, until a hand on my shoulder broke my reverie. Go after him, Alex. You're free. I never blinked, looking up at Maya, who looked back at me with the vulnerable, teary smile. You never were mine, Alex. Not the way you are with him. I see it now. I see everything now. I won't hold you back anymore. You're free. Maya, my voice faltered as I tried to understand her. She chuckled softly, her eyes filled with bittersweet amusement. Let's chase that moron before I change my mind and keep you for myself. I couldn't process it all, but I knew what I had to do. Maya's forgiveness did matter, but more than that, Ben mattered to me in that moment. Maya drove me to the airport, and I called Ben's phone over and over, but it went straight to voicemail. My heart raced as we reached the airport, panic setting in. Where was he? And then, there he was, standing in the line at the check-in counter. Without thinking, I sprinted toward him, grabbing his arm and yanking him out of the line. Ben looked at me, eyes wide in shock. My anger flared. How dare you? I spat, heart pounding. Who are you to waltz into my life, flirt with me, make me fall for you, and decide to walk away? Alex, No, Mr. Cocky Parker, you don't get to decide and define us alone. I was done being submissive as I grabbed for his collar, pulling him closer. You're not running from us anymore. Not from your family, not from your feelings, because now you've gotten me involved with you. So if you try it again, I'm going to hunt you down. Ben rubbed his jaw, chuckling in disbelief. His eyes flicked to Maya, who stood behind me, watching with a soft smile. He seemed vulnerable, broken. Alex, I couldn't do this to her. You belong to her. That's for me to decide, you idiot. And I belong to you, I whispered, my hand on his chest. Ben sighed with a soft smile. This is going to be tough, my love. No one's going to support this. Support us. Our love is enough for us to fight for. We are enough to support our love. Ben's resolve melted over my words as he chuckled, bringing me close to peck my forehead. Never let me go, Alex. He pulled me into a tight embrace, and I felt everything. His pain, his love. I closed my eyes, breathing it all in. Never, ever. As he pulled back, Maya appeared closer, her expression soft and playful. I don't forgive you yet, she teased, but I hope he's worth it. I smiled, looking toward Ben. He is. Conclusion. Though our relationship wasn't perfect, We found a way through the chaos. Over the next few months, there were awkward dinners, moments of insecurity, and plenty of laughter. Ben stepped in to save the family business, and Mrs. Parker was finally happy seeing her kids bond. Maya found the love she deserved. Ben and I, two missing pieces, had found each other, completing the puzzle. One evening, after an intense makeout in my rented outhouse, Ben teased, "So we're finally normal now?" I rolled my eyes, laughing. Normal? Nah, but we're definitely worth the chaos. And together, we embraced whatever came next. Have you ever pursued someone who was forbidden? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our rainbow force and stay wholesome.